Hola,
Hello, good afternoon.
good
Welcome,
afternoon.
welcome to Lunch and Learns with Corner Counselor. Um, all right. Uh, can you guys see and hear everything okay?
Yep.
I'm getting feedback from somewhere. Where am I getting feedback from? I'm getting feedback from somewhere. Okay. Um, so hello and welcome to another installment of the relationship series. This is like my favorite time of the entire week, where we get to sit and talk about things, real things. For those of you who do not know me, I am Genevieve, and I have been a registered psychotherapist in Ontario for almost 10 years now, and that's a really long time. Um, so I love to travel and teach, and I also love relationships of all kinds, romantic relationships. Yes, I am a hopeless romantic. I love platonic relationships, and I love the idea that we can improve our relationships. I think that's what appeals to me most about relationships, that we can evolve and grow and heal and learn in the context of relationships. And um, so today we are going to be talking about power and abuse in relationships. I think it's something that we don't normally get a chance to talk about, but that the majority of us do experience on some level. And so we'll be going through a few definitions, a few sort of subtle signs, and simply again, just sort of want to locate us where we are. Um, it's an informal conversation. If you want to throw your mic on and ask a question, if you want to throw something in the chat about who you are, where you're from, it's an opportunity to meet other people, to collaborate, and then just to share our opinions, our thoughts, and our ideas. So it's quite informal, but of course I will frame for us our conversation with a few slides and just a little bit of information, so that we know where we are, we know what this is and what this is not. Um, all right, I'm gonna actually sit real quick because I feel like. Just one second. Just making sure that I have this in check here. Okay, so we will start today, as per usual, with a basic definition of what we are talking about. So power and abuse, we're not going into anything too deep. But we're going to keep it surface with this definition. Power and abuse is the misuse of a position of influence to take unjust advantage of individuals, organizations, or governments. Okay, so again, I am not an expert. I just have a passion for conversation and a passion for um, relationships and for reflection and introspection and about relationships of all kinds. So I love collaborating and connecting and gaining more insight and information about relationships and how we can do them better. Because I think we're created for relationships and we find our source of joy and purpose as well as pain in relationships. And so if we can learn how to do them better, then why not? So I encourage open sharing, again, open mind, mindful approach, and just being respectful as well. So I'll also say this is a hard conversation. I recognize that many of us have experienced abuse in relationships. So I want you to be mindful of yourself as we have the conversation, um, and just sort of gauge where you're at. I know sometimes it's attached to shame, if we have been perpetrators of abuse knowingly, and then of course it's attached to shame if we have been abused. Sometimes we can feel shame about that, and a lot of times violence, abuse, control, power, all those things, harassment, they're kind of things that we want to hide and be private about, because they're hard things. So I just want us to sort of normalize some of the feelings or thoughts that might come up as we have the conversation, and also normalize the reality of power and abuse in relationships. Okay, so this happens within the context of all, if not most, if not all, of our relationships. It shows up everywhere on all levels of society, individuals, families, institutions, jobs, and so on. And so it's an issue that we do face in our world today, regardless of race, class, age, ableism, all the things. So I don't want you to think it's just one thing that we're talking about today. We're talking about sort of the construct or the idea. So all of the ideas and thoughts that you have are relevant as it pertains to the topic. Okay. So here's our overview. We'll look at some signs, some red flags. We will talk about what impact looks like, right? Some power dynamics in relationships that may be subtle or more obvious. Boundaries and communication, which are important to relationships, as well as to combat or mitigate against the ongoing power and abuse, or control cycles in relationships. We'll talk about some resources for healing and growth. Of course, I have a personal challenge for us all as usual. We'll talk about next week, and then I'll take any questions if we do have any questions, or we can ask questions amongst ourselves. So we're going to be identifying signs of power and abuse. Oh, maybe I'll frame us first. So again, we want to be open as we discuss. We're not here to be critical of anyone, but more open to gaining, again, more insight. And my philosophy, and I'd like to frame this, my philosophy is not pathological here. So like people who exhibit or experience power and abuse in relationship are like, they're sociopaths, or we're not talking about like personality disorders or anything like that. We're talking about something that's kind of reformative, right? So anyone and any relationship can recover or can be reconciled and can heal, if the parties want to and have been involved with, abuse or what have you. And so I want us to sort of think of it more as a way of relating rather than sort of sort of like a pathology. Okay, so it's like a learned behavior, learned way of relating to one another. And so I want us to frame it like that, so that we're not like pointing fingers, blaming, and getting too much out of the scope of our conversation today. And it's based in learned behavior. So I want us to sort of frame ourselves that way rather than in sort of a pathological way, or pointing fingers and blaming. So yeah, I want us to frame our conversation today. And then of course, we're looking at all forms, harassment, violence, control, power, abuse, and so on. All right, red flags in in relationships, and when it comes to power and abuse. I put 3 eyes here, and the eyes are intentional for us to remember. So isolating, insulting, and intimidating of any kind, in any way, on any level, in any relationship, okay, can be considered power or abuse, or misuse of power and abuse. Okay. And this is a blanket statement for a reason. So I'm talking about anything, in jest, in teasing, insulting, humiliating, disrespecting in public, in private. Yeah, in all relationships, mother, father, children, bosses, managers, spouses. There's no place for any of these things in the context of what I would consider, and I said I for a reason, what I would consider a healthy relationship. Okay. And so I would be isolating would be things like, if you're in a relationship and your partner might be trying to keep you from your friends or from your family, or they want all of your time, that would be kind of isolating you from like socializing, or you can't go to school or something, or you can't go to work, things like that. Silent treatment is also isolating in relationships. Yes, it is. And many of us use that tool when we are upset, when we're angry, sort of a passive aggressive way to get our point across rather than expressing ourselves with words. So isolating can definitely be a red flag, and it's a red flag for us. So I want us to look at ourselves too, because we each exhibit some form or on some level abuse or power struggle in relationship to take power or to hold on to power. or to get power or what have you. So I want us to also look at ourselves in the relationship. Insulting, we know what insulting is. Any kind of derogatory terms directed towards, another person. I remember when I actually started studying to become a psychotherapist. I had someone say to me, and they were very upset with me, and we were in very close relationship. And in order to hurt me, because they knew this was my passion, they said, "You're going to be a terrible counselor." And I said, "Do you really think so? Is that right?" But I definitely was able to identify that as abuse in the relationship, especially because they knew me and they were in relationship with me. And I knew I wasn't going to be a terrible, terrible counselor, but it hurt, right? It still hurt. And that was the point. The point was to hurt me. And I want us to identify that insults, anything like that, any kind of demeaning, derogatory words. I want us to be able to recognize and identify that within ourselves, but also towards us in the context of relationship. That is a red flag, 100%. And then intimidating would be and maybe I'll give you another example from my life. Intimidating can be anything from threats, threats with like body language threats, facial expression threats, threats that are verbal, threats, of violence, threats to take things away. Um, withholding things like withholding affection, that can be intimidating. Withholding, um, celebration. I don't know, just that kind of like intimidating way. Like you have to do what I want you to do. Um, and intimidating can also look like violence around. And so I was in a relationship where um, I received a gift. It was a gift. It was a plant. It was a plant, and I really loved the plant because it was from someone that I really cared deeply about. And my partner at the time took the plant and my partner at the time was very upset with me, took the plant and held it over the balcony and was like, "Oh, I'm going to drop this plant." And it was very intimidating. Like it was like, "Whoa, this is like threatening, intimidating behavior." It wasn't me physically. It wasn't, my personhood or my body. But that's another way of intimidating, destroying things that you like, that you love, that you appreciate, that you want to keep. That is another form of intimidation. And so I want us to just sort of recognize what kinds of behaviors can be considered abusive um, or for the purpose of gaining or taking or increasing power in the context of relationships. And of course, there's a natural power differential when it comes to parents and children. I get that. However, there are still ways in which parents overstep that sort of natural authority that they have as parents, and it moves into an abusive, intimidating, isolating, or insulting space, right? So when you start calling your children names, when you start like physically abusing them, and I come from a West Indian, West African culture, and I understand licks and all the things. But we do have to still recognize that these behaviors, even if they're normalized or they're regular or they're accepted within our culture, do produce something that is harmful for individuals as well as relationships. Okay, so when we're looking at how to create and form healthy relationships, we're looking at specific behaviors and actions that actually veer away from, say, insulting or abuse or physical abuse and so on. Okay. Um, so abuse, these are all the forms, I thought I would just list them just so we can have them in our hearing as we talk today. And I'm sure we can all find examples of all of these things. Um, and again, violence looks like a lot of things, power abuse, all that stuff. But these are some basics to just understand because there's usually a power struggle. Um, and so emotional abuse, psychological abuse, I don't know, you guys can probably throw your own ideas in the chat if I don't say them in terms of examples. But emotional abuse, things like yelling or swearing or cursing people out, I consider silent treatment to be one of the most offensive forms of abuse. I'm like, because yeah, it's just, you deny somebody's existence. Um, So that's a form of emotional abuse, and I think emotional abuse is actually the number one form of abuse, and the most difficult form of abuse to identify and to prove, as well. So it's very intangible, similar to psychological and verbal abuse, right? Psychological abuse would be anything like threats or name calling. Shaming is huge for psychological abuse. Verbal abuse, again, insults, demeaning people, deferring, things like you deserve it or you're not worth it. Like those are harsh forms of verbal abuse that we internalize. And I don't think we realized that until most recently, when emotional intelligence became, a common conversation, especially in maybe psychological fields. Um, there was a saying when I was growing up, it was sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. And that such a lie. Words do hurt, and they impact the brain in ways um, that are now becoming more evident, to psychologists and researchers and so on, because it does have an impact on how we develop a sense of self. We develop our view of self, and our sense of self and our view of self impacts our self confidence and our self esteem. And so that then contributes to how we show up in the world. That then contributes to how we, show up in our relationships, right? How we speak, what we allow, what kind of boundaries we put in place, what kind of safety we have for ourselves or for others. And so there's a really huge, correlation between the words that we hear and internalize, and then how we then behave, right? So words are very important, and they're actually quite powerful, and it's important for us to recognize that so that we use our words well. Cyber abuse, pretty new thing, came up with the interwebs and social media and all that stuff. And of course, we've probably heard of many cases. There's bullying online. There's a lot of predatory behavior, especially, perpetrated from adults towards children online. There's sexting and grooming, and human trafficking has exploded, in the last decade and a half or so, because of the online access to individuals, to accounts, to profiles, and so on. So cyber abuse is humongous now, and it's so difficult to hone in on. Sometimes difficult to investigate, takes a lot of time and resources, and sometimes difficult to prosecute. So cyber abuse is a really big area, now that, we're sort of trying to grapple with and get a handle on. Physical abuse, very, very, very easy, kicking, choking, punching, all that stuff. Um, Fun, and also neglect. Neglect can be under physical abuse. So neglect would be something like, withholding food from your kids, or, um, not providing like shelter, like locking the child outside. I know there were a few cases of that recently. Locking the child outside, so not providing basic necessities, would be under physical abuse. Financial abuse, again, pretty straightforward. Stealing, borrowing, limiting funds, withholding funds. Actually, I read a stat the other day. It was 99% of, domestic abuse actually starts with financial abuse. And, um, people in the context of romantic relationship, they cite financial issues as, um, reasons for divorce, but it's actually financial abuse that they're talking about when we get into the nitty gritty, and they're describing the kinds of behaviors associated with the finances and the relationship they have to finances. Is actually a quite abusive relationship where there's a power struggle, with regards to the money. So that was interesting to me. There's spiritual abuse. Spiritual abuse, for the church folk among us, or for individuals who are, religious, or who have a certain faith background, that involves community. There's likely to be power struggles, control struggles, especially when we're looking at, um, sort of the structure of religious activity. right? And so there's usually sacred texts, there's usually rituals and rules. And so spiritual abuse can be a thing when there's wrong theology, or when you use your sacred texts, or your sacred rules or what have you, to control others. I remember I took a world religions course, and the professor, he said, if the religious institution, um, in any way tries to control your body, your time, or your money, then it's probably a cult and you need to run the other way. Your body, your time, and your money, if they try to control that in any way or have power over that in any way, then you probably need to run away. And I was like, wow, and I always remembered that. So anyway, that's a way, that's spiritual abuse. Sexual abuse, again, straightforward. It's different from physical abuse, because it's specific to sexual behavior. So anything that's any kind of words or comments or behaviors that are unwanted in the sexual space towards the sexual organs, talking about your sexual parts or anything like that, can be considered, if it's unwanted, um, that can be considered sexual abuse. And of course it aligns with physical abuse and violence as well, and extends very, very far. Sexual abuse can also be cyber abuse. So you can get into the nitty gritty, pornography and all that kind of stuff online can also sort of veer into that area. So it's very touchy. And self-inflicted abuse, self-harm. I consider negative self-talk to be self-inflicted abuse. Self-insulting, right? Oh, I'm so stupid, and oh, I'm so worthless, and oh, I'm so useless, and oh, all that stuff. It's actually quite abusive, and on the inside of ourselves, it doesn't do anything for us. It absolutely doesn't. It erodes our sense of self. It erodes our sense of self-esteem, and self-confidence. So that's the self-inflicted abuse. And then institutional abuse, we look at the isms of society, and how our society sort of structured. Certain people, there's power, there's privilege. Certain people get more advantages. Some people have the power to hire and fire, and other people can't get past the glass ceiling. And some people get promoted, and other people don't get considered, or they get overlooked for promotion. And so we look at all of the intersectionalities and the isms, the racism and the sexism and all the isms, and how that translates into institutional abuse. So those are some forms. And again, y'all can throw some in the chat if you guys can think of others. And then I want us to look at the impact of. Did somebody want to say something? I saw somebody. I heard somebody's camera come on. Maybe not. Maybe throw your hand up because I can't see. I can't
Can you
see.
see me?
Yes, I can. Hello. Hi.
Hi. Wasn't sure if it came on or not. Okay. I better mute.
Yes. Okay. So we'll look quickly at the impact, and I'll be, again, mindful of the time. The impact of power, control, abuse in the context of relation. I have a crying child here because I thought it's important to realize that, it's not just adults, it impacts children as well. And I have a couple stats that I want to share with us as well, they'll highlight the effects, right? And so usually we find power struggles and abuse or control or what have you in relationships, and within families, right? It's a very big thing within families. In our world, I think when we consider abuse and power, we kind of think mostly about like romantic relationships. But there's just so much more. So if there's a parental dyad that is experiencing some kind of domestic abuse, and then there are children in the mix, those children are witnessing that, and they might be modeling that, right? So sibling abuse, I think, is it's like 90% families experience sibling abuse, and it's a huge thing that doesn't even get talked about. Like people don't even research sibling abuse. They're just like, oh yeah, brothers and sisters will fight, brothers and brothers will fight, sisters and sisters will fight, and we're like, let sort of zone in here and not normalize this behavior, because of course that creates maladaptive ways of being in relationships with other people. But anyway, I digress. Um, so anyway, we're looking at the impact of power and abuse and control. And I want us to keep these three things in mind: fear, needs, and communication. Fear, needs, and communication. So the impact affects our fears, or our feelings or emotions, our needs, our capacity to get what we want and need in relationship, and then our communication. Okay, so violence again looks like a lot of things, but if you are afraid in your relationship, if you are afraid to express yourself, if you're afraid that your 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 um your mom or your dad or your friends or your spouse, your partner, if they're gonna leave you, they're gonna reject you, they're gonna embarrass you, they're gonna do, if you have some kind of fear in your relationship, like you need to check that. You need to check what's really going on. If you are afraid to tell them your opinion, you're afraid to differ from them in your opinion, you're afraid to disagree with them in your opinion, you're afraid that they're going to cuss you off or they're going to embarrass you or disrespect you because you say your opinion. Yeah, you need to you need to check that in relationship. There may be something going on that is subtle, that is underlying, that you may not be willing to admit or want to see, or that you just you don't know, right? And so fear is a big one when it comes to impacts of like power struggle and abuse in relationships. Like you'll know, and you'll know when you'll feel it on the inside. You're like, oh yeah, they may say something in jest, and you're like, oh, can I say something back? And you're like, no, I'm going to suppress that. I'm not going to say that. Or you want to really ask for something in the relationship, but you feel afraid because they're going to get upset. You want to go somewhere. You want to like, this is real, right? And these are normal things. I hear that. I work with clients all the time, and they say things like this. Oh yeah, I'm afraid of losing the relationship if I don't fill in the blank. And I'm thinking, what? Like this is the norm that we're living in today. um I'm afraid that I'm going to disappoint them if I pursue this hobby or this dream that I have, or and I'm thinking, whoa. I had someone say, I'm afraid my spouse loves my hair. They love my hair, my long hair, and I'm afraid that they may look elsewhere, or they may step out of the relationship if I cut my hair into the style that I want. And I was like, does anybody else see what's going on here? Like, this is not normal. You, you shouldn't be afraid that your husband's or your partner's going to cheat on you because you want to cut your hair into a style. I was like, okay, let's get down to the nitty gritty here. Let's really take a look um, at what's really going on. So fear can be an impact of power struggles, or grave differences in power in relationship, as well as abuse. And then, of course, when your needs are not being met, right? If you have to meet your own needs and you have to meet the other person's needs, and your needs are never being met in a relationship, you may want to take a closer look. There might be an unnatural, unhelpful, or harmful power differential, or there may be abuse as well. And so you have to be able to trust that the other person's going to meet your needs. And again, we're not talking about a child, literally a baby, and a parent, right? A child is going to meet a parent's need for self-actualization and love and so on, but a mother or a father is not going to ask their child to like pay the bills, right? So we're not talking about anything outside of the norm or what's expected. um, but in adult type of relationships, and friendship relationships and so on, relationships that we choose to be in, we want to start looking at needs meeting, and whether or not uh, there's a there's imbalance there. And then of course power and control are part of needs as well. If you have more influence or power and control in the relationship, or they have more power and control in the relationship, then somebody's needs are not being met. And then communication is the last one. I think communication is a big issue. If you are open and you're forthcoming with information, and you want to share, hey, I'm making this decision about my life. I want to change jobs. I'm talking to you about it. Those are kind of natural conversations that happen. But if there are, say, um, communication issues that surround sharing, uh, especially when it comes to decisions that might impact the relationship, you want to be considering, maybe there's something else going on here where power is concerned, right? So if your friend, or maybe not your friend, but I'd say more in romantic relationships where there's expectation, um, if your partner changes jobs and it takes them like out of the country, but they just accepted the job but didn't talk to you about it, like, you have to sort of what's going on here? Like, why did we not consult one another on this major decision that impacts the relationship, right? That's a communication issue. Communication that might be invalidating, or that might be aggressive, that kind of thing. The impact of that on us is harsh when it comes to relationship, and our ability to trust and be safe and feel secure in relationship. And so when there's power differentials and when there's abuse, usually communication changes. So there can, somebody can be insulting somebody else, and the other person is just like, oh, yeah, okay, that's fine. One person can be demanding and commanding towards someone else, and the other person's like, okay, yeah, that's fine. One person may be disrespectful or crossing boundaries, and the other person's like, okay, that's fine. So look at how, communication is being had in the context of the relationship, because that can be a sign or a clue that there's power differences and abuse. And then another thing is, I know that a lot of people just feel like they can't like talk to their partners. If you don't feel like you can talk to your partner, that's a sign. And if you feel like, and I remember this the other day because I had a really cool opportunity offered to me, and I called my partner and I said, hey, this thing's happening, and they were like, oh my goodness, that's amazing, that's great. And I do that with my friends, and my friends are like, yeah, that's amazing, that's great, totally supportive you, in support of you, excited for you, happy for you. um, and I realized that that's not the norm for many people. For many, there's a lack of support. There's like, oh, that thing is happening for you, great. There's sometimes like jealousy and so on, like the way that we communicate, um, when it comes to relationships, like we just have to be mindful of. So I'll rush along here. Here are some examples that I think are less obvious to us, sort of some subtle things to consider that I consider abusive in relationships. Um, and I remember, and I didn't put this one down, but it just came back to mind. I remember when I was younger, and I was on the train, and I saw a couple. There were a younger couple, and they were standing up, and the young man he had like his arm around his girlfriend's neck, but like it was like in a chokehold. And I just remember thinking, whoa, that doesn't look good at all. It looked quite violent. And it was funny because he was like, talking and laughing, whatever, and she looked kind kind of alarmed. She was, and her hands were like on his like on his arm here, um and trying to loosen his grip. And I was like, yeah, that doesn't look good. Anyway, it was just a very subtle way in which I noticed there could be, something power control abuse-ish going on. um Oh, complete insults. Thank you, Natasha. So these are, yeah, mean and derogatory nicknames passed off as endearing. That's definitely a subtle way in which people usurp or achieve or take power in relationships. Finite statements like, "Oh, you just never do that right. You never cook me dinner. You're always late for this." Like those kinds of statements. Those put you down if you hear them, or you put others down if you say them. Okay, so make sure to be very clear about what's going on. There's no nevers and always. Be very clear. Name calling and then just joking, like saying mean things and then, oh yeah, yeah, I'm just joking, or typing like mean things and then putting like laugh out loud at the end of your text. Yeah, guys, stop. So that can be considered abusive as well, and um, part of the power control model in relationships. And whether it's your friends, your parents, your boss, your spouse, your partner, your husband, your wife, just be mindful of that. Complete insults. I I say complete insults. Things like, oh yeah, oh you tried, but yeah, you're just not cut out for that, right? You hear kind of, it's kind of like a compliment, but then they take it back, like, oh yeah, oh, so you're going to the gym, oh too bad you haven't lost any weight. Like, what? Like, is that supportive? I don't know if like, what is the intention behind those kinds of statements? Like, it's not to help, it's not to make you feel good, right? And so being mindful of those, within ourselves, and then very rude, and then also being open to hearing it. So just having our ears open, when other people are speaking to us, and we're gonna learn how to call it out in a second. Dismissive of your feelings and of your dreams, that's a big one. Listen, power and control happens in so many ways. So if anybody's trying to tear you down or demean you or degrade you and say, yeah, that's silly, or that's not going to work, things like that, like, you have to check that right away in the context of a relationship. You say, you throw a hard line down and say, no, that's not the way we're going to communicate. This is what I expect and what I want in relationship. If you can't support me, then nobody chat to me. Sorry for those of us who don't speak patois. So sarcasm is another one. I think sarcasm is one of the lowest forms of communication, and I think it just derails us from our our higher calling to be harmonious, connected, and authentic in the context of relationship. And it opens, and I think sarcasm closes the door to vulnerability as well as, transparency. And so if we want to have honest spaces where we can be brave and have conversations, then sarcasm has to be off the table, right? Because it can be very abrasive when you're attempting to be transparent and show yourself, and to connect with other people, and people are being sarcastic. um Thank you. Well said, thank you, Natasha. um they say things like, you take everything so seriously. So, um you were just sharing this. Oh, you guys can chat. Listen, I feel like I'm talking a lot, so thank you guys for throwing the comments in the chat. um yeah, I don't know. What do you guys think? These ones are up there. I don't need to read them. You can read them for yourselves. But yeah, I don't know. Have you guys ever experienced your own sort of subtle ways in which people have showed up and, try to take power in the relationship, and maybe throw in a little bit of abuse in there? You guys can throw on your mics if you like, or if you're not in a space, you can throw it in the chat.
Hey everyone. Um, so I'm glad that you brought this up, because there's actually a situation that I have with somebody that I used to consider a friend. And I always like consider the fact that there are two sides to the story, but this slide just, it shone a light on the fact that I played a bad part as well. Like, I was also a villain in certain aspects. Like, I remember the friend sharing in a group that they wanted to do something, like they wanted to make a shift in their career, and I shot
Hmm.
down the idea. I'm like, boring. And like, I was just like, whoa, wait a minute. Like, looking back, I'm like, whoa, that was actually so out of line, because that was something that they were seriously considering, and they shared that with everybody. And I was like, out of line for myself to do that. I also probably lost their trust in a certain way. Like, after that, some events that happened between us were not really conducive to my development at the same time. But I'm just taking ownership from my part as well, and hoping that I haven't done that to anybody else. Sometimes I really need to reevaluate how I provide feedback for things that I don't necessarily believe are best for a friend, but I still have to be
Yeah.
mindful of how feedback.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yes, thank you for that. Oh my goodness, taking ownership, and that's so important for and and maybe I'll say this again. All things can be recovered. Like, nothing is, it's never set in stone. Like, we all make mistakes. But thank you, yeah, for taking ownership of that and just recognizing, for the self. And we all do it. It's not well, none of us are exempt. But yeah, just being able to notice how our words and how our attitudes towards others can affect and impact them. And yeah, thanks for that, Sim. Appreciate that. I think knowing
Uh,
your own
I
worth
was,
truly. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. I was just reading a chat.
oh yeah, no worries. Yeah, no, I was just remarking, as I was saying, how sarcasm really has no place in vocabulary. Uh,
Nope.
and I don't know for anybody else, but life and death are in the power of the tongue. If you really and truly believe that we can create
Yeah.
through speech, if you believed that everything you said could happen, would you change how you speak?
Love it.
So yeah, it's just one of those things. Sarcasm, and when you see it in that light, you can recognize how sarcasm really has no place in vocabulary, as it doesn't
Yeah.
achieve what you're looking for in any way.
Yeah. Definitely. Definitely. Yeah. Thank you for that. Absolutely. And that's just like reinforcement. Um, Life and death are in the power of the tongue. Like our words matter, and they matter a whole lot. Um, and so yeah, we have to just be very, very, and even just evaluating for ourselves, like where that tendency or temptation comes from to be sarcastic. Like what are we avoiding? Right? Like what do we actually really want to say? Um, I remember I was staying at a friend's house, and they were playing music, and I was in another room, and I wanted quiet because I needed to focus. And I went over to the room. I was like, do you have to play the music so loud? And I thought, what did I really want to say? I really wanted to say, hey, do you mind turning down the music a little bit because I'm trying to focus? Why did I have to come at it that way? Right? So even just subtle ways in which we express ourselves, right, can be very derogatory and just like unhelpful and harmful in relationships. So let me be mindful as we have a good amount of time. We got about 20 minutes or so. Um, so you guys can see the things. I think I wanted to say my favorite one. Mm, Yes. So so this one is more in the context of like work, because I think a lot of people experience like discrimination and abuse and power differentials at work, right? You're in a position and you have a manager and you have a supervisor and you have so on. But I want us to be mindful of like the natural differences in terms of position, and then the unnatural ones in terms of person to person conversation and communication. We are all equal. We are all worth the same. We are all human. And so when you come at me on a human level, you talk to me like I'm a human. But in the context of the job, when it comes to responsibilities, that might be a different story. So something like taking credit for your accomplishments or thoughts or ideas, or overlooking or blocking your advancement in the context of the work environment, I want us to be mindful of that as well, because that's a really big thing that I don't think people really notice often. Some stats that I thought would be cool. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, roughly 1 in 4 women and 1 in 10 men have experienced domestic violence from their partners at some point in life. Children who witness or experience abuse or violence are 40% more likely to have difficulty in school, low self-esteem, depression, difficulty forming relationships, insecure attachments. And these are all forms of abuse, right? So we went through the whole list. Children do pick up on emotional abuse, verbal abuse, psychological abuse, neglect, all of those things. And then 90% of elder abuse is perpetrated, sorry, by family members. So we know that women are more at risk for experiencing abuse, but men do experience abuse as well. And so yeah, those are just some stats that I'd like to ground ourselves in. And then Simone kind of touched on this earlier as she shared her own personal experience of realizing when she herself was in a position to harm the relationship or harm another through their relationship. And so my question to us is just think about it. Like, in what ways do I try to gain power in relationships? In what ways do I feel powerless in relationships? In what ways might I be abusing others in relationship or trying to control others in relationship? And for what purpose, right? Do I feel invalidated or lack of value or what have you. And so in an effort to balance things out, I might try to manipulate or guilt trip, or I might try to I don't know what withholding is a big one, like the whole shut down silent treatment thing. um that's just so huge in relationships. But just thinking about, in what ways do we um tend to exhibit this behavior, or any kind of any kind of behavior in our relationships that is unhelpful, and then what's the product of that, what's the outcome of that, right? So if you're in, I don't know, if you have relationship with your parents and you're like, oh, me and my parents have such a terrible relationship, well, what's going on there? And I get that this is a risky invitation to look at the self, and it's not for the purpose of judging yourself or like having a pity party or anything like that. It's ultimately for the purpose of like improvement. So we can't change what we don't see. And so if we are able to, and maybe willing to, see ourselves, Simone very courageously and bravely saw herself, and the shortcoming, um as she shared. But just how do we really show up in our relationships, and how is it contributing to a cycle of abuse, or a cycle of power, or just a cycle of unhealthy relationship in our lives? And oftentimes when we don't know ourselves or like ourselves, or we're not aware, we can show up in really harmful and maladaptive ways in our relationships. And that is the truth, especially if we've learned unhelpful or harmful ways of interacting and relating, as we've grown up in our families of origin. So, yeah, just sort of thinking about it. I know for me, I used to do a lot of withholding and withdrawing. And it was only when I realized, like, I don't have the kinds of relationships that I want, that I actually started asking people in my own life, like, what do you think of me? Like, what is your impression of me? Like, how do you feel when you're around me, when you're with me? Like, what's going on? Like, what do you see in me that could stand to be improved? Um, and constantly over and over. And I ask people that I love and that love me, and that I know that. So it wasn't going to be some kind of like dishonest or rude whatever. It was, you're kind of dismissive. Sometimes you can be very critical. Sometimes you can be judgmental. Sometimes all of those things. And I started to realize I was exhibiting behaviors. They were protective in nature. I didn't want to be too close because I had my own stuff going on, but they were still impacting and affecting others in my life in harmful ways, as well as eroding my relationships. So I was like, oh, okay. So I hear these things, and I'm showing up in abusive ways. I'm showing up in ways where I take power, where I can feel powerful in relationships, but they're not lending to connection. So yeah, I had to sort of begin to check some of these destructive attitudes, and start working on developing new ways of engaging, of interacting, of interrelating with other people. And I mean, it's a long journey, and it's not easy. And so it's not like, oh, Kevin, you have a question or a comment? Come with it.
I
Talk to
guess
us.
I guess a comment
Mhm.
in terms of what you were sharing to some degree. You know, what I've come to the realization of is that typically, if you want to notice a- an area of improvement in relationship, you can most certainly find a means of improving the relationship within yourself before seeking how to help someone else
That's
improve
big.
the relationship. Because by you becoming better, it almost induces others to relate to you differently in a better way. So you'll actually
Yeah.
achieve a sooner result by improving yourself, regardless of the degree of the situation or the angst or the turmoil, whatever it is. You're sooner to achieve the desired result by finding a way to improve yourself before trying
True.
to help somebody else. It's kind of like that saying in the scripture about, you're trying to take the plank out of somebody's, or take the mite out of somebody's eye, the dust out of someone's eye, before
You have a plank in
removing the
yours.
plank from your own. And you might not recognize what's going on in your eye as a plank, but again, you don't have control over people, but you have control over yourself.
Yeah,
So
that's exactly what you
you're
just agreed with
sooner,
Tanya.
yeah, so you're sooner able to achieve something positive moving
Yeah,
forward by improving you.
yeah, absolutely. That's good. That's good. Yeah, thank you for that, for sure. So important. Thank you, Natasha. It's so important to reflect because, Kevin, absolutely 100%. Like we can do a lot to change the dynamics within relationships by changing ourselves. Because when we change ourselves, people have to respond to us differently, and there may be pushback at the beginning, because we're changing the rules and renegotiating, but eventually things will have to change or things will have to separate. Um, and I actually heard a story not too long ago. There was a lady, she had endured like physical abuse in her marriage, and she said that it was like 8 years or something like that. And then she came home one day and she was like, "No, I am not going to take this anymore. You either go to counseling or I'm leaving." She said he went to counseling. He worked through all of his stuff, right? Because obviously he had learned to relate in very maladaptive ways. Um, and he never from that day hit her again. And they have like a beautiful marriage now. It's been like 10 or 20 years or something. And so I use that as, one out of many examples. Like we are able to change and learn and grow and transform ourselves. Um, it's just for us to be courageous enough to do that. And some of the ways we can do that is um, to recognize emotional abuse and to set boundaries in place. Boundaries is a huge thing. Um, KJV. Yes, definitely. Um, Boundaries is a huge thing. And I think when it comes to emotional abuse, we teach people how to treat us. And that is a reality. And I know as children, we kind of have to endure. But as adults, we teach people how to treat us. And so we cannot ignore our boundaries or, allow others to invade our privacy or what have you. Like we have to be very mindful of putting boundaries in place. And boundaries are usually pretty fluid, um, and we can change them, of course. But just to give us maybe a stepping stone or sort of one thing that we can do. Um, and as Kevin so wonderfully said, here's a breaking the cycle formula. Healthy relationships, guys, based on for sure mutual respect between people, openness, transparency, all these words, vulnerability, communication, partnership, all these things, right? Whether it's your mom or your dad or your sibling, your friend, your spouse, your partner, your boss, mutual respect is a thing. And it really does start with us. If we don't do this for ourselves, within ourselves, and to others, then we can't really expect it. Um, and so when we start to treat ourselves properly and we treat others properly, then we can decide whether or not others are meeting us where we need to be met. Um, or if they're not, then we can choose to be out of relationship with them. Number two is acknowledge the cycle. So see it, admit it, and hey, this is there. Number three is take a compassionate approach. So again, being patient with the self, being patient with the other. We can reform things, we can reconcile things, and then of course have a vision for the kind of relationship that you want. Like, oh my goodness, there's so many things. When we start relationship, we start testing each other, and we kind of we kind of gauge like what can I get away with, what can I not get away with, and this is normal, right? We do kind of bidding in relationships, but what's important when we are building our own relationships going forward as adults is that we know what kind of like how do I want to feel in my relationship, like what do I actually want in the relationship. Do I want to have open communication? And number five is along the lines of that, don't plant seeds that you don't want to grow. If you guys don't want to have banging of the cupboards and banging of the plates going forward and nobody's talking for 3 days and whatever, then don't start that cycle. Don't plant that seed. Don't start with the silent treatment. Don't start with the withdrawing. Don't start with the shutting down. Don't start with the insulting. Don't start with all that stuff, because then it won't have a chance to grow. And then if you have started with that, then it's time to pull up some weeds and start again. Start with a new conversation, start with a new approach, right? And so for me, I know I want something real. I don't want like this sort of like Disney thing where nobody talks about anything, nobody ever disagrees, everybody's always getting along, and everybody oh my goodness, yeah, no, no, I want to talk about the real thing. I want to know. I want to know who you are. I want to know the good, bad, and the ugly. I want to be able to accept that, and I want you to be able to accept me for who I am and all of who I am and where I am at this point in time in my life, and be willing to allow for us to change and to grow, right, and to develop and to expand and to transform and all the things. And I know what kind of relationship I want. And so I call people to that place. And I know some people say, oh, Jen, you challenge people too much. And I'm like, yes, I will, because I want you to challenge me. I want the kind of relationships where we are iron sharpening iron, like that's exciting for me. I want there to be like purpose and love and like passion and forgiveness and, personal accountability. And like, I love that when it comes to relationships. And I want to have healthy relationships. And it's hard work. But if I have a vision, then I know what I'm working towards. Kalenia says, love and operate in reality and honesty. Yes. Have and show grace, Kevin. Yes. Iron does sharpen iron. Amen, Jen. I'm not preaching, but go ahead and throw an offering into the offering plate if you want. No, I'm kidding. But yeah, just sort of, just being mindful of that, enabling things and allowing for things, like just nip it in the bud right off the bat. Like you come at me sideways, I'm gonna check you right now, immediately. Don't let it go past 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, and then you're like all mad and upset. You're like, oh, well, you talk to me like this. No. I'm coming at you right now for now, right? Because I don't want that seed to grow and fester and turn into some kind of relationship that I'm not happy with. Here's some resources, and you guys can shout me out if you'd like. Throw your email in the chat if you'd like the replay of this. These are just some resources that I put in place. They are all Ontario-based or they're international. I put Corner Counselor at the top. Why? Because I believe in therapy. I believe in therapy for recovery and healing. And I know there's some therapists in the chat, so throw your information in there, guys. And speak the truth in love, Kevin. Yes, I love that one. And so if you are interested, right? If you're interested in healing and recovery, I love when clients say to me, I just want to be better. I just want to improve myself and grow. Because I'm like, if that is your focus, I promise you, your relationships are going to look so different in a year, 2 years, 10 years, and you are going to be so happy and fulfilled in your life. Like, even if all your old friends decide that they don't want to grow with you, that's okay, because you'll find new like-minded friends to grow and flourish with. Like, and it might be hard and there will be grieving and there will be times of despair, but I promise you, if you come to focus on yourself and desire to grow and to learn, and to like self-actualize, like your life will change. Your relationships will change. Your purpose will change. Everything will change. So I believe in therapy, and that's why I put Corner Counselor first. Corner Counselor is my private practice. I have great, amazing therapists that work with me, who are always open and willing to work with clients. And then, of course, there's, Kids Help Phone. We know about those. Male survivors of sexual abuse, the Canadian Network for the Prevention of Elder Abuse. So just some resources there for us to take with us. And as we wind down, this is your personal challenge for today. Take something from whatever we've talked about, whatever we've said. Kevin threw KJV into the place, came with the scriptures. Thank you. Some folks came with their own personal experiences, their own reflection on their own lives, and how they've shown up in maladaptive ways, or hurtful or harmful or abusive ways. Just take whatever, take something to observe and reflect on, kind of to protect and allow to help you grow and have better relationships in general, but specifically as it relates to your sense of power and control, and abuse. Maybe you need to apologize to someone. Maybe you need to grieve something and let go. Maybe you need to encourage yourself or speak up more, or you need to go get healing for an inner child wound, or I don't know, you can just sort of take whatever comes to mind and reflect on it. So we'll wind up next week, guys. We're doing, I know everybody's going to be here for this one. This is like my favorite one. Everything. Oh, it's just everything to me. Building a lifelong romance at any age. Okay. That's what we'll be talking about next week on the relationship series. And I am super excited about this one because I am a hopeless romantic in spite of myself. Okay. I cannot help it. So we'll be talking about what the components are for building that lifelong romance, even if there's been a rocky start or there's been a late start. Okay. So we'll talk about that next week. Join us, and I'll be throwing out the invitations and so on. For the replay, check the Mentiverse app, download it, and update it so that you can get the replays. And all the replays up until last week should be up there now, so you should have access to that. And then, of course, do we have any questions or comments to close? I would so appreciate you guys. You can throw them in the chat, or you can say them out loud. And then, of course, the survey link is there, and I'll send it out later if you throw your email in the chat. Because I would love your feedback for how to make this even better and more fun and more interactive for us as we talk about real topics that are really important to the essence of our lives. We are created for relationships, people. So let's learn how to make them great. Thank you guys so much for being here. Any comments or questions as we close today? I just like to be respectful of your time because I know some of us are on literal lunch. Thank you guys for throwing your emails in the chat. Any comments as we close? You're welcome. Absolutely. My pleasure. Y'all know me. I have fun with this. Anything else? Anyone else? Anyone want to shout out as we close? You're welcome, Kevin. Thank you so much for being here. All right, guys. Well, enjoy the rest of your day, and hopefully you guys enjoyed your lunch. And I will see you guys next week for building a lifelong romance at any age. Enjoy your week, guys.
Bye.
Have a good one.
Bye.
I'm going to stay on here for 2 more seconds.